Jamal wiped the sweat from his forehead as he dribbled the basketball down the cracked pavement of his neighborhood court. The laughter of his friends echoed through the small park, a gathering spot surrounded by modest homes and swaying trees. At 14, Jamal had a knack for fixing things, from broken bikes to old radios. He dreamed of becoming an engineer, his mind constantly buzzing with ideas. Despite his humble surroundings, Jamal's world was filled with hope, determination, and the love of his close-knit community. Across town, a different world existed, one of towering mansions, pristine lawns, and glittering luxury cars. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed in a room bigger than most apartments, surrounded by shelves of untouched toys and gadgets. At just 10 years old, Ethan had everything money could buy, but lacked the one thing he craved most: freedom. His days were planned by nannies, tutors, and bodyguards, leaving little room for adventure. Rebellious and headstrong, Ethan often dreamed of escaping the suffocating grip of his privileged life. Their worlds seemed light years apart, but destiny had other plans. Jamal's neighborhood, though far from perfect, was alive with energy. Kids played tag in the streets, elderly neighbors exchanged greetings on their porches, and the aroma of barbecue often wafted through the air. Jamal loved his community, but he also longed for a life beyond its boundaries, a life where he could turn his engineering dreams into reality. Ethan's world, on the other hand, was quiet and sterile. The high walls around his family's estate shielded him from the outside world, a fortress of wealth that felt more like a prison. He often gazed longingly out of his window, wondering what lay beyond the gates. His parents, though loving in their way, were consumed by their business empire, leaving Ethan to navigate his gilded cage alone. On a particularly sunny afternoon, Jamal and his friends were engrossed in a lively game of basketball. Meanwhile, miles away, Ethan sat in the back seat of his family's sleek black car, bored and restless as it wound its way through unfamiliar streets. His father had sent him on an errand with a chauffeur, a rare venture outside the mansion. Ethan's curiosity peaked as he watched the world outside, a world he had only seen in passing. As the car approached a stoplight near Jamal's neighborhood, Ethan leaned closer to the window, his wide eyes soaking in the scene. The vibrant energy of the area was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was chaotic yet alive, a stark contrast to the rigid order of his own life. Unbeknownst to either boy, their paths were about to cross in a way that would change both their lives forever. Two boys from two different worlds would soon cross paths in a way no one could predict. Ethan stared at the towering gates of his family's mansion, his fists clenched in frustration. Another argument with his father had left him seething. The constant security, the rules, and the suffocating schedule, it was all too much for a 10-year-old boy who just wanted to breathe. Tonight, he decided, would be different. He'd waited for this moment for weeks, watching and learning the security guards' routines. When the time was right, he slipped out through a gap in the perimeter fence, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. The city at night was a maze of lights, sounds, and unfamiliar faces. Ethan wandered farther than he intended, each street pulling him deeper into a world he'd only seen from the safety of his car window. He was free, but the euphoria was short-lived. As the evening wore on, the once inviting streets turned menacing. The bustling crowds thinned, leaving shadows and muffled voices echoing in the alleys. It was then that Ethan realized the weight of his mistake. He was lost, alone, and completely unprepared for the world outside his privileged bubble. In Jamal's neighborhood, the scene was winding down. Families settled into their homes, and the streetlights flickered to life. Jamal, still energized from his basketball game, decided to take a quick walk to clear his mind. He wandered toward an alley known for its troublemakers, not expecting to find anyone there at this hour, but he was wrong. In the dim light, Jamal spotted a small figure cornered by a group of older boys. Their voices were rough, their laughter menacing. Ethan stood frozen, clutching his designer jacket tightly, his face pale with fear. The group taunted him, mocking his expensive clothes and obvious wealth. Jamal's instincts kicked in. "Hey!" Jamal shouted, his voice cutting through the tense air. He approached confidently, masking his own nerves. "What's going on here?" The older boys turned to Jamal, sizing him up. They knew him well enough to know he wasn't easy to intimidate. Jamal quickly concocted a story about a police patrol nearby, planting seeds of doubt in their minds. "You really want to stick around here when the cops roll through?" he added, his tone firm. The group hesitated, muttering amongst themselves before retreating into the shadows. Jamal let out a quiet sigh of relief before turning to Ethan. "You okay?" he asked. Ethan, still shaken, brushed off Jamal's question. "I didn't need your help," he snapped, his pride stinging. But Jamal could see through the bravado. "Yeah, sure," Jamal replied with a smirk. "Let's get you out of here before you find more trouble." Ethan reluctantly followed Jamal as they made their way out of the alley and toward the safer parts of the neighborhood. Despite his initial annoyance, Ethan couldn't help but notice how confident and capable Jamal seemed. He navigated the streets with ease, offering a sense of security Ethan hadn't felt all night. As they walked, Jamal tried to break the ice. "So, what's a rich kid like you doing here anyway?" he asked. Ethan hesitated before replying, "I was just tired of being stuck at home. My dad doesn't let me do anything fun. I wanted to see what it's like out here." Jamal chuckled. "Well, you picked the wrong part of town for a late-night adventure." Ethan frowned but said nothing. After a moment, he asked, "How do you know how to handle guys like that?" Jamal shrugged. "You grow up here, you learn a thing or two. It's not all bad, though. People look out for each other." The two boys continued talking as they walked. Ethan shared stories of his life in the mansion, fancy parties, private tutors, and endless rules. Jamal listened with a mix of fascination and pity. "Must be nice having all that stuff," Jamal said, "but it sounds kinda lonely." Ethan nodded slowly. "It is." In turn, Jamal told Ethan about his neighborhood, his friends, and his dreams of becoming an engineer. Ethan was surprised by how passionate and determined Jamal was. "You're really smart," Ethan said, genuinely impressed. "Why don't you go to a fancy school?" Jamal laughed. "Fancy schools cost money, and that's something we don't have a lot of. But I'll figure it out. I always do." As the night wore on, the boys began to see each other in a new light. Ethan realized that Jamal's life, while challenging, was full of things he lacked: community, independence, and a sense of purpose. Meanwhile, Jamal saw that behind Ethan's wealth was a boy just as lost and yearning as anyone else. By the time they reached the edge of Jamal's neighborhood, the tension between them had melted away. They weren't just two boys from different worlds anymore. They were two boys who had found an unexpected connection. The night had grown colder, and the streets quieter as Jamal guided Ethan toward what he hoped was a safer route home. The moonlight cast long shadows over the uneven pavement, and Jamal's mind raced with ideas about how to handle the situation. Ethan, though calmer than before, kept glancing around nervously, clutching his jacket like a lifeline. "Just a few more blocks and we'll hit a main road," Jamal assured him. But as they rounded a corner, the boys were confronted by a construction site. The area was fenced off, with signs warning of danger, but parts of the barrier had been knocked down, leaving gaps big enough to walk through. "Let's go around," Jamal suggested, but Ethan, curious as ever, stepped closer. "It's a shortcut, right? Can't we just cross?" Jamal frowned. "It's not safe, man. Come on, stick with me." But Ethan, eager to prove he wasn't as helpless as Jamal seemed to think, stepped through the gap in the fence. "It's fine," he called over his shoulder. Jamal groaned in frustration and followed, keeping a watchful eye on the uneven ground. The construction site was a labyrinth of half-built structures, exposed rebar, and scattered tools. Jamal's warnings echoed in Ethan's ears, but his sense of adventure pushed him forward. He stepped onto a loose patch of dirt near a large pit, and before he realized his mistake, the ground gave way beneath him. "Ah!" Ethan's scream tore through the night as he disappeared into the darkness. Jamal's heart stopped. He raced to the edge of the pit and peered down, his breath hitching at the sight below. Ethan had landed awkwardly at the bottom, groaning in pain but thankfully alive. "Stay still!" Jamal shouted, his voice trembling. He scanned the area for anything that could help, but found nothing useful. With no time to lose, he steeled himself and climbed down into the pit, his hands gripping the cold, rough edges of the dirt wall. When he reached the bottom, he crouched beside Ethan. "You okay?" he asked, his voice calmer than he felt. "I think so," Ethan replied, wincing. "My ankle hurts, though." Jamal quickly assessed the situation. The pit was deep, and Ethan couldn't climb out on his own, but leaving him there to get help wasn't an option. Jamal's mind raced, his problem-solving instincts kicking in. He noticed a long piece of rope tangled near the edge of the pit. His eyes lit up with an idea. "Hang tight," Jamal said, patting Ethan's shoulder before climbing back up with effort. He grabbed the rope and some sturdy-looking wooden planks nearby. Returning to the pit, Jamal worked swiftly, tying the rope to one of the planks to create a makeshift pulley system. He secured the other end of the rope to a steel rod jutting out from the ground. "Okay, this might be a little rough, but it'll work," Jamal assured Ethan. With great care, Jamal looped the rope around Ethan's torso. "Hold on tight," he instructed. Using all his strength, Jamal hoisted Ethan up inch by inch, his muscles straining under the weight. Sweat dripped down his face, but he refused to give up. Finally, Ethan reached the top, where he scrambled onto solid ground. Jamal climbed out after him, collapsing beside Ethan, both boys gasping for air. For a moment, they just lay there, the danger finally behind them. "You saved me," Ethan said, his voice filled with awe. Jamal managed a tired smile. "Yeah, well, someone had to." The flashing lights of black SUVs pierced the darkness as a team of security guards poured into the construction site. Ethan's name echoed through the still air, carried by the frantic shouts of men in suits. Jamal glanced at Ethan, who sat on the ground clutching his injured ankle, relief flooding his face. Moments later, a tall, imposing man stepped out of the lead vehicle. His sharp suit and authoritative demeanor marked him as someone used to being in charge. Mr. Harrison, Ethan's father, had arrived. "Ethan!" Mr. Harrison's voice boomed as he hurried toward his son. The boy's face lit up with a mix of guilt and relief. Mr. Harrison crouched beside him, gripping his shoulders tightly. "What were you thinking? Do you have any idea how dangerous this was?" His tone was sharp, but his hands trembled as he inspected Ethan for injuries. "I'm okay, Dad," Ethan replied, wincing as he tried to adjust his position. But Mr. Harrison's attention shifted to Jamal, who stood a few feet away, dirt-streaked and exhausted. His eyes narrowed. "And who is this?" he demanded, his tone cool. "Another kid from the streets trying to take advantage of the situation?" Jamal's posture stiffened, but he said nothing, meeting Mr. Harrison's gaze with quiet defiance. Before he could respond, Ethan interrupted, his voice stronger than it had been all night. "No, Dad. Jamal saved me, twice. You don't understand." Mr. Harrison blinked, surprised by the vehemence in Ethan's voice. "Twice? What are you talking about?" Ethan gestured toward Jamal. "I got lost, okay? I wandered into this neighborhood and these older kids cornered me. Jamal showed up and scared them off before they could hurt me. Then, when I fell into that pit, he climbed down and pulled me out, even though he didn't have to." Mr. Harrison's expression softened slightly as he turned back to Jamal, studying the boy more closely. Jamal shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny, but didn't back down. "That's true?" Mr. Harrison asked, his voice quieter now. Jamal shrugged. "Yeah, I couldn't just leave him there." Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady and clear. "Dad, he's the bravest person I've ever met. He didn't even ask for anything in return. He just helped me." There was a note of admiration in Ethan's voice that Mr. Harrison hadn't heard before. For a moment, Mr. Harrison said nothing, his sharp mind processing the night's events. Finally, he straightened and extended a hand toward Jamal. "Thank you," he said sincerely, "for everything. It seems I owe you a debt I can't repay." Jamal hesitated before shaking the man's hand. "You don't owe me anything, sir. I just did what anyone should do." Ethan shook his head. No, Jamal, not everyone would have done what you did. Mr. Harrison nodded, his gaze thoughtful. You're right, Ethan. Not everyone would. And I believe someone as resourceful and brave as you, Jamal, deserves more than just gratitude. He gestured to his security team, who stood awkwardly nearby. Make sure he gets home safely. Jamal frowned, his pride prickling. I can get home on my own. Mr. Harrison chuckled lightly, sensing the boy's independence. I believe that, but consider it a small token of appreciation. As the security team prepared to escort Jamal, Mr. Harrison turned to his son. You've grown up a lot tonight, Ethan. I'm proud of you for speaking up and acknowledging the truth. Ethan nodded, his gaze meeting his father's. And I'm proud of Jamal, Dad. He's the kind of person I want to be friends with. The words hung in the air, surprising both Mr. Harrison and Jamal. Jamal gave Ethan a small, genuine smile. Thanks, man. Mr. Harrison stepped forward, placing a hand on Jamal's shoulder. We'll talk again soon. There's something I'd like to do for you. Consider it a reward, whether you want one or not. Jamal raised an eyebrow but said nothing. As the SUVs pulled away, he couldn't help but wonder what the future might hold. The next morning, Jamal stood outside his modest home, rubbing the back of his neck as Mr. Harrison's sleek car pulled up. The billionaire stepped out, his demeanor calm, yet curious. Jamal had been expecting this visit, but he hadn't quite prepared for the moment. Ethan bounded out of the car behind his father, flashing Jamal a grin. Good morning, Jamal, Mr. Harrison said, extending his hand once again. I wanted to thank you properly for what you did last night, and to offer you a reward for your bravery. Jamal hesitated, unsure how to respond. He had spent the night replaying the events in his mind, thinking about what this moment might entail. Thank you, sir, he said slowly, but I don't need money. Mr. Harrison raised an eyebrow, surprised. Then what would you like? Name it. Jamal glanced at Ethan, who nodded encouragingly. Then, taking a deep breath, Jamal spoke. I've always wanted to be an engineer, he said. I love building things, fixing things, figuring out how they work. I know you own a big engineering company and, well, if it's possible, I'd like to visit and see how it all works. Maybe learn a thing or two. For a moment there was silence. Then Mr. Harrison smiled, a genuine warmth in his expression. That's quite the request, Jamal, and an admirable one. He paused, his sharp mind already formulating an idea. How about this? Not only will I arrange for you to visit, but I'll also offer you a mentorship. You'll have access to my engineers and resources to learn everything you want. Jamal's eyes widened in disbelief, but Mr. Harrison wasn't finished. Additionally, I'd like to sponsor your education. A scholarship to one of the best schools in the city. A mind like yours deserves every opportunity. Jamal blinked, stunned by the generosity. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Ethan piped up, grinning. You earned it. A rare smile spread across Jamal's face. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. The weeks that followed marked the beginning of a new chapter in Jamal's life. True to his word, Mr. Harrison introduced Jamal to his company's top engineers, who welcomed the curious and eager boy with open arms. They showed him advanced machinery, cutting-edge technology, and complex designs. Jamal soaked it all in, his passion for engineering growing with every visit. Ethan, too, became a frequent visitor to Jamal's neighborhood, much to the surprise of the locals. The two boys, once from vastly different worlds, became inseparable friends. They spent hours working on small projects together, with Ethan eagerly helping Jamal refine his ideas. One bright afternoon, Jamal stood outside a sleek, high-tech lab, a blueprint rolled under his arm. His design, a prototype for a small, energy-efficient device, had earned him praise from the engineers. He glanced over at Ethan, who gave him a proud thumbs up. Jamal took a deep breath, gazing at the building ahead of him. It wasn't just a lab, it was a symbol of the opportunities that had opened up for him, thanks to a night he would never forget. Sometimes, the greatest rewards aren't things you can hold, they're the opportunities to change your life forever.